But the biggest determinant is the per unit return on these $400,000 homes that are easy to get financed, easy to get permitted. They're as easy to sell as catching a can of corn. I mean, virtually all these sales these days are cash. These are cash purchases, so there's no mortgage contingencies or anything. For a developer, this is a really, really easy decision to make, is that all of the financial incentives are pointing to the pathway of least resistance and highest profit. And every time we build 100 of those homes, we create a demand, not a need, a demand for somewhere between 10 to 20 of the affordable units. And that is the formula that has led us down this road of increasingly, year after year after year, exacerbating the discrepancy between the supply and the demand for affordable housing. There are a lot of solutions that can be considered. The county and the city both have committees that are now collectively looking at those potential solutions. But I would argue that there is no silver bullet to a solution, that it is going to take some give and take from all sides, from neighborhood side, from government side, from developers side, from builders side, to assemble a comprehensive group of policies and decisions that will slowly begin to edge away at this discrepancy between the supply and demand of affordable housing. It's not going to make anyone happy, frankly, but I don't really see another way to do it.
John, the only thing I would counter what you said is that a lot of times these developers and developments get multiple times of what they can get in density, and as a concession, they're supposed to give a small percentage of affordable housing. Or like when UTC got built, right? And they wanted all this stuff, and they were supposed to build 750 units of affordable. And this is not just about affordable housing. They get concessions on, they're supposed to pay for their roads or whatever. But they wait, they get that approval. They say, okay, I went from 50 units to 5,000 units, now 15% is supposed to be affordable. They wait 6 months, 18 months, and then they come before the county commission with tissues and crying on one hand and a campaign contribution on the other, and then they convince the county commission to let them out of those, stipulations and concessions while they keep the bonuses of the density. So that's the problem I have, is that we're having giveaways without them really giving back to the community, even when they promised to in the beginning.
Yeah, I don't think we disagree. I would agree that's a problem. It needs to be fixed, and there needs to be some standard that could be relied upon by both the citizen interest and the developer's interest. So there's no disagreement there. And then in this group of policy decisions, I think that the community needs to come to grips with. I think that needs to be one of the considerations that are taken. No disagreement. Dan?
And John, to follow in what Lourdes was saying, and to point out also, there was an affordable housing overlay district east of the interstate, and the developer was allowed to build that without the affordable housing that was required, just more urban sprawl. So, the county has not been serious about requiring affordable housing in return for density. And my fear is, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this, that with a county commission which is so developer dominated like we have today, to simply talk about the need for affordable housing without tying it to requirements on developers will just mean that they're going to massively increase densities as an excuse given by affordable housing. That we're just going to give it all to the developers, more and more density, and that's going to allow them to build more apartments. And to do it in places that are not compatible with the existing neighborhood. I don't think that NIMBY's a bad thing. Not in my backyard is a legitimate imperative to be concerned about what happens in proximity to your home. So isn't there a danger that this legitimate concern could lead to even more uncontrolled density, more traffic congestion, neighborhood compatibility, environmental destruction, tax hikes, because growth doesn't pay its own way, without really solving the problem, but creating more problems in return?
The answer is yes. There is a threat of that happening. I have been following this comprehensive plan since 1978, 79. I was engaged in the 80-81 amendments. We've seen an intensification and density increases in the plan. And to the best of my knowledge, it has not resulted in a single affordable housing unit. Density in and of itself does not create affordability. I'm going to get a little bit on really edgy ground here. But there's this concept that if you increase the supply, you will decrease the price. It's widely held belief, you hear that all the time at the county commission meetings, but that's not entirely true. You have to increase the demand so that it actually, you have to increase the supply to the point where it actually impacts the demand before that will ever happen. If you think about toys at Christmas, a Tickle Me Elmo doll is extremely expensive because the demand is low. If the manufacturer of the Tickle Me Elmo doll says that I'm going to produce another 100 dolls, that's not going to impact the price at all. They increased the supply, but it had no impact on the price, because in order to get down the price of the Tickle Me Elmo dolls at Christmas, they would have had to have produced hundreds of millions of more of these dolls to bring down the prices. So in order for the supply side of this equation to actually bring down the price of a home in Sarasota County, where the demand is so great, the supply would have to be increased to a number that I don't think anybody in this room really wants to look at. That would be the Broward County or the Miami-Dade County. So in and of itself, increasing density is not going to bring down the price of a home, and it's not going to make housing more affordable. It's only going to happen if a lot of other measures are taken into consideration, and there's very strict performance standards on increased densities to attain affordable housing. And there's examples of this working around the country. We've just not done it here yet in Sarasota. And it's going to take a great deal of political courage to do it. But you're right, we haven't seen it yet.
Hi. I have a question on a different topic. More how to approach a situation that I'm finding troubling. The development that I am dealing with at the corner of 41 and Stickney, the county commission asked staff to come up with a scope of work for Benderson to put together, or to answer to, I should say. And Parks and Recreation, one scope, indicated that there should be 1 acre of open space for every 47 units that were to be built. And that was in the scope. And then magically a second scope of work was produced, and that vanished. And instead of 1 acre for every 47 units built, they weren't required to give any open space at all on their plan, and they could count as their recreation, Siesta Beach, and Philippi Estates. So I was very concerned about it, and I called Parks and Recreation actually last week to go over it again because they were looking at this new submission. And I was told that, well, they included the 1 for every 47 because of the 2050 plan. But the county planner said, no, you don't need to look at anything. We don't need to have any sort of open space component. So my question to you is, we have a comprehensive plan. Can a county planner just decide not to follow certain rules and regulations? I'm trying to find out why and where the power lies. Does the power lie with us pointing out there should be some open space on this property, as opposed to just driveway turnarounds, which is on their current plan? Or how can a county employee usurp that power, I should say?
Sure.
And what can I do about
Yeah,
it?
the power doesn't lie with either one of you. The power lies in the adopted, it sounds like you're talking about a level of service requirement. And there are ordinances that the county adopts that prescribe how various levels of service are measured. County staff does not have discretion to deviate from those levels of service. They are established by the Sarasota Board of County Commissioners and adopted by ordinance. Unless you have a very thorough understanding of, if it is, I'm assuming it's a level of service. I can't be certain from what you said. But there's very little discrepancy that staff has, and you have no authority to change it either, or to demand something greater. So I would suggest that I would ask, typically when I have always found the county staff to be very accommodating, so I would go to that county staff person and ask them to point in the ordinance where the discretion or the change of the decision is founded. In absence of not having that document in front of me, there's no way that I could give you better advice than that. But somewhere there is a written rule of law that prescribes how that decision is to be made. And you nor the county staff person have the ability to discount it. Frankly, even the Sarasota County Commission cannot, unless the discretion is embedded in the ordinance. Otherwise, they have to hold public hearings to amend the ordinance. So go to the staff person and just tell them you're confused, that you want to see the language that provides for this recalculation of open space.
I have a question. I don't know how quick it is. Hi, I'm Larry Silverman from Alta Vista neighborhood.
Hello, Larry.
Hi there. Thanks for an interesting question that you're posing here. The one thing that I overwhelmingly hear, and I'm appalled, and I'm naive, so I'm going to ask something without really knowing if I'm coming from left field or not. The state, was founded on growth, and growth means people coming here with their retirement and luxury savings, and basically making this into a glorified housing development. And I have yet to hear how we're going to cope with an economy that's disintegrating, that's disintegrated. We need, in my view, to do something. I mean, we don't manufacture anything the way in anything near the way we used to in North America anymore. In order to have some kind of sustainability, you can't keep relying on people coming here, especially the baby boomers are probably the last generation who's going to be able to retire at a reasonable age, at least for their foreseeable future. All the younger generations are seeing a declining standard of living and are needing to work well as long as they're possibly able in order to just make ends meet, except for the creative class. So my question is, where is the thought of incentivizing technology to come here, light manufacturing? I don't want it to be a smokestack with the environmental load, but there's a couple of windows made in Venice. There's a couple of, we could be making foods here and all manner of things. We could have dynamic tourism with real tourist destinations other than sitting on a beach. There could be an amusement park or something dynamic and distinctive that draws people here other than sitting on a beach and retiring without even the infrastructure to support the population. It's a big dormitory if you don't even have a road to get in and out of your neighborhood. That's my thought, my question.
Well, Larry, that's a topic for another day, because we could speak all evening on that.
Am I making sense?
Oh, yeah. I would, the Reader's Digest version of that is that, first and foremost, we do it this way because this is the way that we've always done it. It's really easy to attract the type of tourists and the snowbirds and the residents that we do. There's a lot of money that has been made in the real estate industry in this community, and it's kind of the default mode that we've always just found ourselves in. Over the last 20 years, there has been a great effort with limited success, I would acknowledge, in diversifying our portfolio of industries that would provide for stabilization in various economic climates, and also provide for especially stabilization when the real estate market goes, or the finance market goes bust. You would actually be surprised at the amount of manufacturing that goes on in Sarasota. There's a group that I would direct you to called SAMHSA, and it's the Sarasota Manufacturers Association, something. And that's exactly what they do, is promote these clean industries. There's a lot of new industries around the tech and the medical device that is starting to flourish in Sarasota. So you are not alone at all in your thoughts. There are people far smarter than myself who are engaged in this activity. But the bottom line is, it's been so easy to make money in the real estate industry that just seems to be the place that we always end up.
Okay. Yes, hi, I'm Tom Matrulo. I'm with the Fresh Start organization. I was intrigued by your talk, in part because you told a story, and the story basically suggested that Florida had a moment of amazing sanity back around 1980, and it put into place plans that actually had some rational coherence for projecting for the future. I used to cover the Regional Planning Council in Fort Myers back in the 90s when Wayne Daltrey was there.
I chaired that council for many years.
And it was a great group of people, and they still had some teeth, and Wayne was always talking about the science behind planning and how he could see coming pretty much what we see today, but he was seeing it back in 1995. That's science, that's knowledge, that somehow seems to have been evaporated as they lifted off all these regulatory levels, so that now we're down to a local level, according to your story, where there's really nobody taking the place of rationality. We don't have any enforceable rational mode of planning, so people do what they want. Guys propose dumps next to the salary fields. What exactly do we have in the way of recourse, besides just political will and standing up and waving signs, that actually could put some controls into the planning that is about to unleash thousands upon thousands more homes out east of I-75?
Well, the first thing that I would suggest is that I think you're too quick to discount this role of citizen activism and standing up and saying what you believe in. It is an interesting artifact of the study of growth management in the state that the growth management laws that were serving the state by most reasonable metrics had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the demise of the real estate industry. In fact, there's better evidence to suggest that, they were helping the real estate industry as opposed to hurting it. So I always felt it kind of ironic that we would take that set of data and use the exact opposite argument to undermine these rules that were effectively building better communities, greater economic prosperity, and stronger environmental protection and covenants. My only suggestion is that it's very difficult to build these systems. As we have seen, I just went through 15, 20 years of building the system, and it collapsed in a very, very short period of time. I mean, just under a couple governors, 5 governors' work was undermined. And it's going to take time to build it again. But a lot of change, and not necessarily change that you or I would consider attractive, can happen during that interim. And so I would argue very strongly against in any way suggesting that the voice of the people is not the strongest tool that we have to bring about change. There are people in this room that I have been working with for decades and decades and decades, and that's the only real tool that we've ever had. And we were actually able to bring about legislative and regulatory change with those voices that then gave us the power and the opportunity to put forward what we felt were these community inspired goals. Right now, this is not the first, after a while, after doing this for 3 or 4 decades, you recognize that this kind of goes in cycles. This ain't a good cycle to be in. If you're, working towards environmental preservation and water quality and things like that, this is a kind of a tough place to be. But this is why I was trying to emphasize that's when it's time for good people to stand up and say, this community means a lot to me, and, we're going to suggest to our elected officials that they maintain these high standards that we've developed through these now generations and decades of hard work. So don't discount that. That's, it's been proven to be very, very powerful. And I would not discount the existing county commission either. I know there's a lot of ill words that are said about them. I've known every county commissioner personally since the late 1970s, and these are good people trying to do good things. And I still try to find that goodness in people and look to that side of them to make change. One of the things that I would suggest, and I have another talk that I love to do, I used to do it a lot in the state, and that is how to impact local policymakers and policymaking processes. And one of the things that I would encourage you to do and CONA to do, I know that you're doing it because I've watched what you were doing out on the quad properties, which I of course was there when it was created. The Selby Fields concept came from myself, Sarasota Bay National Estuary Program, and an amazing hydrologist whose name is Steve Swan. That's where it was going to be lighted ball fields was the original plan for the Selby Fields. So we had to buy the quads in order to get blah, 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 blah stuff. So I would just encourage you to keep your voice strong in as many people as you can to support your perspective and continue building these relationships with the county commission.
Ask Tom to tell about it.
And I'd like to jump in and say...
Give it to Tom. He's going to tell about the 25th.
Okay, wait a minute. I would also like to say that there are 3 aspects to government. There's those who are elected to it, those of us that influence it, either by contributing candidates or money, or participating as activists, and the press.
Give it to Tom, because I forgot to have him announce, but it ties in totally with what John just said. Tell about the 25th and Fresh Start.
Sure. Okay. Real quick. CONA has been tremendously supportive of our efforts to introduce some sanity into the Selby Fields proposition. We've spent the past 5 months going out to the community. We actually put out a request for community-based proposals. We received more than 40 ideas for the quad properties. We've had them evaluated by a fabulous team of people, including a couple in this room, including Steve Swa, who you mentioned. They have come up with about 8 proposals that we think are viable and could enhance the area. We're going to be bringing a selection of those to the county on April 25th. Tomorrow we're having a roundtable where the community will actually decide which of those proposals we're going to take to the commission. But that's a private meeting tomorrow. But on April 25th, I believe it's going to be in the morning. We're not yet sure of the time, but we're on the agenda. We will be presenting what we've come up with and asking the county, okay, what can we do now to help you?
I would say, and John Miller was here earlier. He was one of the persons, along with myself, that have engineered and led the challenge to preserve environmentally sensitive lands and conservation lands in Sarasota County. We worked on the various campaigns along with Z and a few others here. One of the most difficult things to do is to get property into public ownership. It sounds easy, but it's really, really hard. So anytime you have a parcel that is in public ownership, there is a high bar to set in order to reverse that and put it back into private ownership. Sometimes it is appropriate, but I would suggest that bar needs to be extraordinarily high, because going back the other direction is very difficult to do. So anytime I see a piece of publicly owned land and there's talk of surplusing or otherwise privatizing its use, I would say that's one of the highest standards that government needs to hold itself to in terms of a public interest criteria.
Another question over here.
I'm Becky Bedford. I'm interested in this meeting today because of the bath and racket project that's going on. And I found it very interesting when you were talking about apartments versus how single-family homes and stuff. The word they kept using in our workshops was, this is what they needed to build in order to make it viable. Well, what someone considers viable when you're selling real estate or building has to do with how much profit you want to make.
Yes.
So if you present this to the commissioners, do they take in consideration on this is what's going to be viable for this personal owner of bath and racket as the negative that it impacts our neighborhood? So yes, this builder can...
Yeah, they're supposed to take both into consideration, but the preservation, and you're in the city, and I got to admit that I do not know the city's plan near as well as I do the county's, but a priority in the county is the preservation of existing neighborhoods. Dan's probably been the leading defender of that policy for as long as I can remember, and that's a long time. Yes, we do need apartment buildings, but we also, apartment buildings, or, I don't know, are they apartments or are they condos? They're both. Oh, because some of our luxury condominiums in downtown Sarasota create the highest demand for the need for affordable service workforce housing. They just do. So there's this, if you want to learn more about the subject, there's a study, a group of studies out there called the Residential Nexus Analysis, RNAs they call them. And what they did is they take various classes or various development scenarios, and they actually use social science to assign an affordable housing need based upon that type of land use. And some communities have used it to mandate things such as inclusionary zoning, which is where you must build these affordable units in these lower price range in order to get development approval. You must pay a fee in order to build these units somewhere else, or there's a lot of science out there, good social science on the issue. But yes, we do need apartments, but the apartments need to be in particular locations. They need to be near employment centers. They need to be such as Sarasota Memorial Hospital or something like that. They must be on transit lines, because in absence of being on a bus line, the amount of automobile traffic that they generate can be very problematic. So I would look more at the specific use that they're looking at in order to try to sway an elected official. Is this really at the expense of the neighborhood? Is this serving some sort